Welcome to Return on Intelligence on Markets Plus, presented by the BMO Institute for Applied Artificial Intelligence and Quantum. I'm Kristin Milchanowski, Chief AI and Quantum Officer at BMO. In this series, I sit down with global technology leaders to explore the future of innovation, data, and AI, and what it all means for decision makers in financial services. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Return on Intelligence. Today's conversation is about the gap between intelligence and judgment. And organizations are generating more intelligence than ever, models, predictions, insights, but far fewer are converting that into decisions that compound over time. I am so pleased to be joined by Ken Nickerson, the secret Santa of Xanadu, one of the big quantum Canadian startups that just went to IPO, partner in technology innovation at Maverix Private Equity. Ken, I describe you as a futurist. I'm really looking forward to our time together. Ken really brings this rare combination of kindness, builder, operator, and investor perspective, and also a long view on where humanity's going, where technology's going. So really looking forward to this time together. Ken, thank you so much for carving out a moment with us here today.
No, thank you very much for having me.
I think first, tell us about Xanadu. Tell us what you helped create, what the team's doing there, and what you're so excited about with what's coming in the quantum domain.
Sure. So roughly a little over a dozen years ago, I was minding my own business, having a coffee where I was kind of the secret Santa at Mars. And someone said, you should meet this guy. He's a physicist from Australia, and he's doing some neat things. And it turned out his name was Christian Wiedbroek, the founder, CEO of Xanadu. But at the time, he had a company called CipherQ, which was a supposedly quantum-proof encryption company. And I have a pretty deep background in encryption, and frankly, it didn't excite me. So I said, why waste the time? We went down to Mercata, if anyone's familiar with Mars, up in Toronto, and had a coffee. And I said, what else can you do? And he said, I've been thinking about building a quantum computer. And I went, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then he goes, but I'm going to build it out of light. And it's one of those rare moments where you go, hey, you had my curiosity, but now you have my attention. And so on the spot, made the decision to invest. And we did the seed round, Series A, Series B. At that time, I was handling some money for OMERS, which is the pension fund here in Canada for primarily police and firefighters. And I was helping them out because my sister was at the police force for 30 years. And I thought, what a nice way to give back.
Again, the way that I think about how we process data today on chips is very much like we're stuck in traffic. The cars get hot. If it's a hot day, being stuck in traffic, it's a lot of friction. It's not enjoyable. You move to point A and B, but it costs a lot of fuel to do that. If you're in a fuel-powered, it costs a lot of battery to sit in traffic. And then when I think about light and moving towards a light experience with photonics, that experience is akin to being on a fast-paced racetrack, getting to go around a track at high speeds with a whole lot less friction and a lot less infrastructure needed than when you're stuck in traffic. So just kind of giving a very broad analogy to kind of what light and photonics is. But when you think about how clever and how unique Xanadu is to approach a quantum computer with photonics, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So the thing is, everything in the universe, and I'm a very simple person, it starts with energy, and it's a fulcrum between energy and information. And we discovered that, unfortunately, out of wartime and breaking encryption. And there were a lot of models to go down computation. The first models were all analog. The abacus was analog. Decryption of the German Enigma machine was an analog computer. And they settled on what was base 10. So we have 10 fingers and 10 toes, and we like to count that way. And analog computers are great for that. The problem with analog computers, even though they're in some ways superior, we can talk about that in a minute, and the delta between, say, finance or accounting and AI, and which one suits which purpose the best. But what's interesting about it is that in the 1940s, it turned out that it was just too hard to make an analog computer. And so electricity was kind of vogue. We tend to describe our own bodies or physical worldviews based on the current technology. And vacuum tubes came along and they could act somewhat like a transistor on and off, but you had to drop down from base 10. So imagine yourself with, instead of 10 fingers or 10 toes, having 2 fingers or 2 toes. And it turned out that you could build a computer that way, relatively speaking, effectively, where it would have been impossible to build an analog computer then. And so we just got better at building things that could be on or off. And we started with sliding beads to vacuum tubes to transistors. And then Intel came along eventually with the 4004, the first processor. For those of you that are old enough, the original IBM PC had what was called an 8088, which was a cheaper version of the 8086. But the point is, it was all binary, or base 2. So we count in binary 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1. You work your way up that way. It's very effective for being very disciplined about the outcome you wish. So this is a bank. You have an ATM. If I go to the ATM and I say, what's my balance? And it says, well, Ken, you got $408.12. It's very exact. If we were to use analog computing, the kind we see in quantum or neuromorphic or biological, you would say, what's my balance? And say, hey, you got about $400. It would be far faster, far less energy required to get that answer, but it's not as precise. And so because a lot of the computation came out of the military, where it was really trajectory for missiles or bombs or bullets, you had to be exact. And so digital took off. Binary or base 2 took off. It turns out, though, after 50, 60 years, it's horrible for AI. It's absolutely a cul-de-sac, a dead end. And the reason is its precision actually works against it.
And this is where you've been teaching me about joules.
Yeah. So it turns out there's no measure for energy. There's many measures, no singular measure. So we say watts or volts or horsepower, but the one I use is joules. I write one paper a year, but I came up with this concept about 10 years ago called J over C, joules over calories. And we see this in labor displacement with AI. Now that the technology is starting to catch up with robotics, we'll certainly see an impact on blue, gray, and white collar labor. Because if I take an average person that's a professional and I've got to feed them 2,000 calories a day, you convert that to joules and give it to an AI or robotic system. For that same 2,000, first off, it'd be less than 2,000 calories if it's analog, but it would be working 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And so there's this disparity between energy usage. And so I always take everything back to the original. You take it down to the baseline. The universe exists with energy and information. When they're in balance, things tend to flow. When they're out of balance, there's friction. And so you talked about the car and the hot and the air conditioning. Right now, we're spending as much energy cooling the processors that are digital so they can pretend they're analog than we are using the energy to do the actual processing itself in a digital infrastructure. That has to change, or we're in a cul-de-sac for AI and the progress of computational fabric. And so I do believe that analog computing's the future for AI. Digital will remain. You're certainly never going to use an analog computer for your accounting. But as we move up the progression to emulate humans under an economic theory of J over C, or using AI and robotics, those systems will absolutely be analog, because the other path, there's just not enough energy produced on Earth to continue the progress, the more recent progress that we've seen in AI.
Ken, thank you for that. And this is so valuable to how I'm growing and learning and exploring and asking different questions. And now in quantum, one of the experiments that our research team is evaluating is, how do you capture the way that people make decisions, which is entirely human at the subconscious level, and using quantum methods to kind of think through measuring multiple variables at once, which is the luxury of a quantum environment, is that you can look at truly multiple things at one time and measure them. I think that the thread that I just want to make sure we close or loop through is photonics. So you gave us a really insightful understanding of the analog and the digital and why we're hitting a roadblock with AI. Can you bring us then to Xanadu and the photonics and what problem that's going to solve and why you're so heavily invested in it?
The reason photonics is more interesting is a couple of things. Eventually, when you have a quantum computation going on, so in quantum computing, everything requires energy to do these computations, and you're trying to reduce friction. And in all quantum computing setups today, you tend to see, whether it's any of the big players, they have these, they call a chandelier, these big kind of looks like an up inverted trash can to bring the temperature of the processor down to like 4 Kelvin, which is
1 degree colder than space.
Exactly, colder than space. And that is so the atoms don't jiggle around too much. Here's the problem with that. It also sets a cap. It takes tremendous energy to run that cryogenics. You have to slowly freeze them up and slowly heat them up to change the chips. So everything in life has some friction. Everything has friction. You're trying to reduce the friction. And so when you use photonics, you at least have the ability to think through not, hey, we got this to work one time, but how do you deploy quantum computing? And so, for example, the Xanadu computer that's running live today, and there's about 150 universities using it right now, it's on the 26th floor at College and Yonge, above the Yonge Street subway station. I mean, it breaks every rule of how other quantum computers are assembled and used. My finger touches the quantum chip at Xanadu because it's room temperature. And so certain things happen when you use atoms, and atoms like to jiggle around, and they're very temperamental, but light is not impaired too much certainly by temperature, vibration, heat. It also has a speed issue, but the real issue for photonic quantum computing is not the computation per se. It's the whole package. You want to have a quantum computer that you could eventually have in your home, on your phone. Doing that with electrons versus photons, near impossible task. Doing it with photons makes a lot of sense because they work at a speed. They're not impelled by vibration or temperature or thermal properties. And they're incredibly fast. But most importantly, eventually you get rid of that cryogenic chamber.
At BMO, we say that we're boldly growing the good in business and life, and that's definitely our approach with quantum. So I'm excited about where Xanadu is and the market's reaction to it as well. And this calendar year is going to continue to be an exciting time for quantum. Shifting a tiny bit, everybody is so crazed around the AI models and these large language models, and I'm not so convinced. The power that it takes, what the outcomes are that can be achieved by them. I consider 2 of the 7 who invented the transformers to be friends. And so by far, it was a fantastic leap of progress in mathematics and ingenuity. And so I'm very excited about the advancement. But one, where's the value going to come from with them from a corporate lens at scale? And then also this run on compute just doesn't seem logical. So there's a delta in my mind between that reality and some of these numbers we're seeing reported.
There's a bunch of things that wrapped up in that. And so, number go up, people love number go up. So the valuation of these companies, hard to ignore that. And so who doesn't want to benefit from that? So I have total respect for that. The issue with LLMs generically, again, I'm on record 7-8 years ago saying I'm not interested in LLMs. I'm interested in SLMs, small language models.
Exactly.
But now I'm not interested in SLMs either. I'm interested in LQMs, which are large question models. And so it affects education as well. So from roughly speaking, 1900, so the start of the industrial era, till about 2020, the entire value of education was that questions are cheap, answers are expensive. With the presence of LLMs, and we probably have inverted that. So I think that now the answers are free, questions are expensive. But to be able to ask a good question, you actually have to have deeper knowledge and you have to have creativity. The point in this is that the LLMs ignited a path. And the real path they ignited was that there's a ceiling to what you can do with digital computation. And so back in the, I'm going to say 50s or 60s, it's been a while since I looked at this stuff, there was these guys working on neural networks and at MIT, and they were discounted because they were very simple, single layer. They weren't computationally really relevant for anything. And a guy named Marvin Minsky, who ran AI at MIT, he wrote a pretty scathing review. And so we went down this digital path and we had expert systems and neural networks. But, it's a broken model. We are machines ourselves in a way that tell stories. And there's lots of ways to witness that. So all of us live roughly 80 milliseconds in the past. And the way I can prove that, and it's the most fun way to do it, I do it with students all the time, is you go to a building where the escalator's broken. And literally every person trips on the first step. It's fascinating to watch because your entire life, you're predicting. You're predicting what's going to happen next. And the problem is LLM's great at synthesizing and finding that data, but it's got overkill, underkill. And so the overkill is, say you take a large LLM, a trillion parameter LLM, and put it into a robot to fix toilets. Does that LLM to fix the toilets really need to know the complete works of William Shakespeare. And so there is a natural path from LLMs to SLMs or MOEs or a mixture of experts to scale it down. But we're scaling it down because the computational cost is beyond what we can afford to do, for example, in terms of labor displacement. And so we're prediction machines, and we're constantly predicting. The LLMs are more like synthesizing. And so a sea change is coming where we need a new structure. And so all the current work on AI, everything's a step forward. It's good, but it's really not drawing us closer to that analog future where for 20 watts, you can have a generic thinking machine that works on a digital platform. And frankly, every year I just get a little tiny bit more frustrated about the claims being made we're on the path to AGI. I don't think we're even at the starting line.
Exactly. Ken, I think that I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, because of your expertise in how you are able to successfully put your finger on what success looks like with different technology firms and help scale them and bring them to life.
I've done maybe 30, 40 companies, and several have gone on like multiple billions of dollars. And why? I invest under very simple criteria. Basically hire one kid a year. So I've been doing that for 34 years. The first kid I ever hired, his name was Mike Serbinas. And so there's this great network of kids. And I always wondered, what is the core thing that was attractive to them in terms of investing or being friends with them for literally now, in one case, 34 years. In fact, in Mike's case, not only are we friends, but I introduced him to his wife, Laura, and I'm the godfather to his children. And the point in that is, what is the core attraction? For me, it's very simple. I like fear. So when I meet with a kid who's wicked smart, I get scared. Literally, it's a PDOOM investment methodology. And in fact, I own the URL pdoom.vc. I bought it on purpose because I only want to invest in things that reduce PDOOM. And so I have all these kids floating around that are super, super smart. I love meeting someone that scares the death out of me. That's how we met. We started talking at a BMO event, and I went, oh my gosh, you're so smart. Okay, I'm going to get your signal, and we'll start messaging. So we've been messaging ever since. Just, like anyone, you only have so much time in the day. You seek folks that you can learn from and that are contributing to society. And I'm telling you, whenever you get down about the world, it's amazing the talent that's out there when you go looking. But I worry a lot that the disenfranchisement of the raw intellectual horsepower in our youth, it's also okay to be creative and push the envelope into unknown spaces. And so, frankly, that's the number one thing to encourage in these young minds when they get a chance to.
So I have he's now 6-year-old, and I think it was a weather day, an issue, but I had to keep working. He was at home with me doing some art projects behind me. And it was a full work day that we got to enjoy together. And at the end of the work day, he said, "Mommy, Siri is AI." Yes, that's correct. And he said, "Mommy, what you do is AI." Yes, that's correct. "But Mommy, AI will never know how I feel." Yes. And he pointed to himself and he said, because it's not going to know what's inside here. And he was 5 turning 6. And I was just like, wow, the ability to pick up on that everything I was doing in a day, all of the AI that already surrounds our life. And I do try to live an unplugged life as much as possible with lots of books and lots of reading and a lot of creativity. But it was just really shocking to me that someone that small can already pick up on those things.
The most hopeful thing I have for the future of whether it's AI or quantum computing is the return of why. Because why requires creativity, requires depth of knowledge and thought.
Which is a large reason why I wrote Return on Intelligence.
That's why I read it.
Yeah, thank you. But the return on intelligence is that we do need to get back to the why. I do emphasize what we share in common, which is the empathy side. And I fundamentally believe that innovation without empathy is just efficiency without trust.
Yeah.
And we have to design everything that we're doing with that end goal of empathy in mind and really care about the decisions that we're making and where we're choosing to implement or not implement to scale. That empathy piece is valuable to humanity. It's critical to a winning culture and to business. Ken, putting you on the spot, so it's completely okay if you don't recall. you had shared with me a very detailed review that you did of my book, of the key things that stood out to you.
So I think the biggest thing, honestly, is that when you read most books, I read everything I can get my hands on, basically. And every other book I read on AI is basically, for lack of a better word, a cheerleading book. This is better, faster, cheaper, whatever. Very few are pushing back saying this is not enough. So I think what stood out most is very few have realized that, yeah, we're optimizing this path, but is this the right path to be on in the first place? And I think that was probably the most unique thing.
Thanks, Ken. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
And thanks to everyone listening and joining us on Return on Intelligence on Markets Plus, presented by BMO Institute for Applied Artificial Intelligence and Quantum.
The views expressed here are those of the participants and may not necessarily represent those of BMO Capital Markets, its affiliates, or subsidiaries.
For BMO disclosures, please visit bmocm.com/podcast/disclaimer.